The Bears were blown away by a revitalised Keighley on Sunday in miserable conditions at Cougar Park. But fear not, it's only one game and there's a long way to go yet. This is the world's greatest podcast about the Coventry Bears. This is Bears Necessities. Yes, welcome to Bears Necessities, your favourite podcast about the Coventry Bears. We live at covbearspodcast.com. We're at covbearspodcast on Twitter. We're sponsored by York's Tim, and you can subscribe to our show on Apple and Google Podcasts, on Spotify and on YouTube too. I'm one of your hosts, Dave Musson. Joining me as always, my co-pilot and former Bears fullback, Craig Cathcart. Now, Craig, you made the long trip to West Yorkshire to watch the game on Sunday. I mean, we'll get to the game itself later on, but how did you otherwise enjoy your trip to Cougar Park? Have you dried out yet?
I'm just about dry and thawed out by now. It was. I know the weather was bad all across the country, but it was horrendous. It was fairly bright at kick-off, but by the time the second half started, it was just absolutely lashing it down. There was a cold, biting wind coming across the pitch. So yeah, it was an interesting game to watch. Put it that way. Disappointing result. As I said, we'll get into that. I mean, in the notes I made a few notes on the day. I called it Cougarmania Part 2. That's basically what it is, what's happening up there. Whilst it wasn't a result I wanted to go and see, I'm glad I made the trip because I think it's the start of something at Keighley, and to witness that was great. I mean, I saw just a few weeks ago when the new owners took the club over, I saw pictures from the ground. I mean, one of the bars was virtually destroyed. There was weeds coming up through various bits of the ground. I think there was some like just rubbish and everything else strewn everywhere. There was a couple of cargo things as well. So they've done a miraculous job really to get the ground ready for their opening fixture, and I know a lot of hard work's gone into it. A lot of volunteers have been down and looking at it, and actually I think the ground hasn't looked better, at least for a few years. It's looking good. There's a lot of potential there to make that a really nice little tidy ground. The hospitality, we were really well looked after, and I know that last year you had Christmas pudding.
I did indeed.
Part of your meal
in early May. Yeah. Just when you want it.
But actually the hospitality was amazing, really good. Everyone was very friendly. I think probably one thing to say about the new regime up there is that I think they've recognised that the small details matter. For things like hospitality and getting the bars right, and small details make it a much more community club. So, I think, I got to meet one of the new owners. There was, the new owners were all there. I think Mick O'Neill had flown in from Australia, and Mike Smith had come from Spain to be there for the game. You can tell that they're really passionate about the club. So I think they're in good hands again. I think the Bears probably picked the wrong time to play Keighley because there was a real buzz about the place, and you could tell on the pitch actually the players were massively up for it, as were the fans. They were out in pretty big numbers to support them. So yeah, it was good from an experience of going to see something happening there. It's the start of something. I think give them a year or two, I think they'll be a real force. I know they have ambitions to get out of League One and get up into the Championship and higher, as they did previously when they owned the club. And they should have qualified for promotion into Super League, but were denied because they the Super League had brought in franchising. So I think there's some unfinished business there. It wouldn't surprise me if Keighley continued to build, but we'll see. It's very tricky, isn't it, building and getting out of League One, as a number of clubs have found over the last few years.
Yeah, it certainly is, particularly when you're starting on -12. But I think it's great for the game that Keighley have got Cougarmania back, and then that club is there. And like you, I mean, I went to Cougar Park for the game last year, which, like you, this weekend didn't go to plan. Obviously, that was the record loss for the Bears, but I came away from that thinking what a nice club it was, and the people and the fans there were great, really genuine lot. And I think it's excellent that the club's been saved, the future's secure, and they can move on. And I totally agree. As soon as that all panned out and it became apparent that their first home game was going to be against the Bears, I was a little bit worried. And then when the weather came in, it was always going to be a tricky afternoon. So I guess coming up, we will go a bit deeper into Sunday's 40-8 reverse away to Keighley, and we'll hear the post-match reactions of Bears head coach Tom Tsang, and we'll also have a quick look ahead to this Friday's Coral Challenge Cup third round tie away to Doncaster. But first, the story of Sunday's wet and windy encounter with Keighley. Craig, you kind of summed it up perfectly when you were describing the weather, that it was sunny at the start and by the second half it had all gone bad. That was pretty much it for the game. The Bears started well. They controlled the game for the first quarter, and they opened the scoring first with a Nick Newman penalty, and then extended their lead to 8-0 with a Chris Barrett try, which Nick Newman converted. But that was it for Bears points, sadly, and it all went south from there on with the weather. By half-time, the Cougars had scored a couple of tries to get themselves 10-8 in front. Still in the balance at that point, but the second half was one to forget for the Bears. The hosts added another 3 tries plus a penalty to make it that final score of Keighley Cougars 40, Coventry Bears 8, in front of just over 900 spectators. 900 very noisy spectators, judging from the radio commentary I was listening to. We'll get some analysis of the game in the moment, but first, let's hear from Bears head coach Tom Tsang, who Craig caught up with right after the match on Sunday.
So, Tom, bright start from the Bears today, but conditions during the game got worse and worse. Keighley were very enthusiastic, played with their tails up. Where did things go wrong, really, in the first half? I guess they got back in the game, and that was it from there.
Yeah, exactly that. So we obviously started pretty well. The first 20 minutes we were doing exactly what we'd asked the boys to do. We were just keeping it nice and simple, kicking early, backing our defence to keep them in their half, and that seemed to work. And I think we had a couple of errors and gave away a couple of penalties in that around about the sort of halfway of the first half, and then they got the tails up. The crowd got behind them because they were quite quiet while in that first 20 minutes when we were dominant. And like you say, the weather was a bit of a factor. It started to tip it down, and credit to Keighley, they just played those conditions fantastically well. They kept it tight, they kept it short, but they kept their tempo. Yeah. Whereas we sort of slowed up a little bit and were a little bit hesitant under the rain, and with our footing, we were catching the ball a little bit, stood still and weren't running onto the ball, and we were doing the same in defence. So all in all, it was quite a few different factors, but generally speaking, you can boil it down to Keighley out-enthused us, and played a little bit smarter, and that's actually a really sort of depressing thing to say as a coach. You never want the opposition to say that they out-enthuse you. If you're going to lose on anything, don't let it be that. But unfortunately today, when it was a cold, horrible, wet day, with almost 1,000 Keighley locals screaming at you, and obviously a very good team running directly at you, it's going to be tough. And the boys, they weren't quite up to it today, but obviously we'll dust ourselves down and we'll dry ourselves off and take out of it what we can, which is that we need to be better, and we'll see where we go from here.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of points in the game where you could really tell the conditions were a factor, because there was a couple of half breaks the Bears made where, on a dry pitch on a sunny day, that we'd have run those tries in. As I said, Keighley kept it tight, and there was couple of lucky bits where they slid over the line and managed to get the ball down and stuff like that. It was one of those where it just wasn't our day today. And I guess in terms of positives, what would you say were the main positives today?
Well, just quickly, you say a couple of points where they were lucky, and I think obviously fortune comes into it, but they put the ball into the right areas of the field, and they put the ball along the floor where it's going to be difficult for our back three to pick it up cleanly, and we made a couple of errors there. And they were just smart generally, like across the board, man for man. They were more enthusiastic and had more energy than us, and then as a result, then that created a bit of a downward spiral in terms of our performance, and then that gave them more enthusiasm and more energy. So yeah, that's kind of where the game went. In terms of positives, I think the first thing is it gives us a real sort of really clear learning opportunity that we know that a game that was clearly within our grasp, because after 20-25 minutes we're the better team, that we just need to stick to our processes and not get carried away and not think not ignore the conditions and not ignore the things that's working for us at that point in time. So there's a little bit of sort of game management stuff that we can learn from it. There was a few players that stood out. Ollie Perslow was excellent in his 2 stints, first half, second half. He just did exactly what we needed in those sorts of conditions. And obviously people like Chris Barrett and Kieran Sherratt were really solid as well. So they're always positives. But you've got guys like Mitch Shaw and Nick Newman who will never have ever played in conditions like that. So they can now sort of put that one down to experience. And if we ever come into these sorts of conditions again, then they'll be a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, and not try to play the same style of rugby in these conditions as we did last week, because we're only going to get undone in those situations. And there was a lot of sloppy ball, a lot of sloppy offload, sloppy ball that in warmer conditions, those balls stick and we score tries. Today, the passes weren't on, but we tried it anyway, and we were on the back of a big defeat because of it. So we need to learn and we need to improve, but we certainly do that.
So we've got Challenge Cup next week on Friday night against Doncaster. Anything that you're planning in terms of that game? Will the squad be fairly similar?
Well, we'll see. There was a couple of knocks that we picked up today, and we're still waiting for a couple of guys to recover from last week. But there was also a couple of guys that just weren't good enough today. Just being completely honest. So we'll look at the guys that we feel didn't do themselves justice, and see if it's worthwhile just bringing in some of the guys that haven't had an opportunity yet. So and we'll see if we can rotate the squad a little bit.
Yeah, it'll obviously be a different game there. It's a different stadium. I think their pitch is pretty much immaculate, so it should be a different game, and I'm confident the Bears will go there and get a decent result. Yeah,
so as we go forward now, we hope that the weather improves, but and as it does, we know that we've got strike across the field, and we'll definitely pick up wins as we go. But we do need to be prepared to play in horrible wet conditions, because the British summer's going to throw a few of those at us, so we need to be better prepared for that.
Thanks, Tom. Cheers for your interview and good luck on Friday.
Cheers, Craig.
So thanks to Tom for joining us as always. So Craig, Tom obviously sounded disappointed with the display, and particularly saying that the Cougars out-infused his side, which seemed to be the most disappointing thing for him. I mean, how did it look for you from the sidelines? Because I was listening to a radio commentary and it sounded like 2 completely different games, first half and second half. I don't remember the Bears getting a mention in the second half, and that wasn't just because it was a Yorkshire-based radio station whose commentary I was listening to. It just sounds like we didn't touch the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get on to the second half in a minute. It was very, very disappointing and very hard to watch, it has to be said. I mean, the Bears were excellent early on, controlled the game, controlled possession, kicked well, completed their sets. It was, I think, 21, 22 minutes, they were 8-0 up. And cruising at that point. I honestly didn't think, looking at that early 20 minutes, I didn't think Keighley had a chance of getting in the game. I mean, they made a number of errors. The Bears were defensively sound. Keighley at times weren't getting out of their own half on their sets. And then scored the try, obviously, to make it 8-0, 21 minutes gone. Keighley then, off the kickoff, sent up the most horrendous sort of kick into the air. I have to say it was like an up and under. Bears spilled it, give Keighley a chance, and they scored from it. back in the game again. So, but the Bears sort of regrouped a little bit then, and still as I said, at that time I was thinking, I honestly thought we'll win this game comfortably. Even then, the Bears got a penalty, and then missed touch with that, and Keighley sniffed a chance, had a repeat set and scored. So 10-8 at half time. I remember speaking to Ron Banks at half time, and we were both saying that we'd actually played quite well, that, I was a bit concerned that they were going to go in with their tails up at half time, having taken the lead not long before half time. And, that's especially as the conditions were starting to worsen. I mean, the rain really was pelting down by that time. But Keighley came out firing second half, scored a couple of early tries, and the Bears really struggled from then on in. It was dominant from Keighley. I mean, the Bears players just couldn't cope with the conditions at times. I think there's a number of lads haven't played in those types of conditions very often. Haven't played on that type of pitch. It was a wet, slippery, muddy pitch. And as I say, very, very cold. Keighley played it brilliantly. I mean, their kicking game was excellent. Their forwards were well up for it. Clearly, as I say, experienced and suited their game. They had a couple of really experienced forwards in there who really ran the show. When the Bears took hit-ups, they were getting, frankly, they were getting swarmed and smashed, really. At times there was 4 or 5 Keighley players in the tackle and pushing the Bears back. The Bears really couldn't play their natural game. Trying to spread the play, there was just no way that could happen. There was a couple of half breaks out wide, but because of the state of the state of the pitch at that time, there's no way they could get away. There's a few times the forwards were taking the ball in and slipping as they were running in. So it was just not a nice watch. It was one of those days where your head's down and not much to cheer in the second half at all, I have to say.
Yeah, I guess this is one of the difficulties of having such a young squad is that lack of experience for when you do have to play to the conditions, and you have to perhaps deviate a little bit from what you want to do and actually manage the game effectively and grind out those results. You mentioned a couple of players who won't have played in that sort of conditions before. I'm guessing you're referring to the 2 Australians in Nick Newman and Mitch Shaw. Bit of the baptism of fire of late English winter for them. I mean, how did they cope? Because it's the first time we've seen Mitch Shaw in League One action, isn't it, as well? So
yeah, I think I would say there was a number of Bears players, not just them, that didn't really cope very well with the conditions. But they must have been, both of them must have been thinking, what is going on here? This is supposed to be a summer sport. Yeah, so Mitch came on, which was great to see. He looked really bright, actually. He looks a real good runner with the ball, really tricky, good passer. He's always looking for a pass. He hits the ball, hits the line at speed, and he's looking for players either side of him. I think on a dry pitch he'll be a real dangerous player for us. Really looked promising, but I think it's safe to say I don't think he enjoyed the conditions very much. I don't think he's played in that sort of those sorts of conditions before. He really did try his best. I think he was targeted a little bit by the Keighley players who were quite intelligent in the way that they were running at the Bears line. Nick Newman. Nick, as I said, started the game really, really well. Looked a little bit frustrated at times because it was a difficult game. But I mean, we know that he's an excellent player, and it would have been very difficult for him to adapt to the conditions. I mean, Keighley kicked it really well. They sent a few kicks down low, skidding across the grass, which were virtually impossible for the Bears back three to pick up. I think a number of the Bears pack as well came up against some experienced players in the Keighley pack, and the thing is they'll all learn from it.
Well, that's exactly what Tom said in his interview. That was the big standout for me in Tom's interview, was the fact that, and it's very typical of how Tom tends to reflect on bad days at the office, such as Sunday was. He sees it more as a learning opportunity for the Bears rather than anything to worry about so much. And like I said, we've got to remember what a young squad the club has this year, probably the youngest in the league. They're going to make mistakes, but as long as they learn from them and move on, it's not too big an issue, is it? And this is only one game after all.
No, and every year, you're going to get maybe 2 games in a season with conditions similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
So and give it another month, and we'll be playing in warm sunshine on a dry pitch. So I think. It's not often the Bears are going to come up against those conditions against a team that's, ready to punish you if you're not on the ball.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, in terms of other stuff about the game, I think it's something I have to mention.
Are we going to talk about the man with the microphone? Because I was going to ask you about the man with the microphone. It came across like... it came across like somebody should have taken the microphone off him from the radio commentary, because he was rather loud, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was. So the guy with the mic was one of the new owners of the Cougars. It was
right.
Mick O'Neill, and okay. I think he was trying to inject a bit of Cougarmania into the occasion.
Mania is a good word for it, I think.
Yeah, and I think. Maybe the home fans appreciated it more than the away fans, put it that way. Mm-hmm. I think a number of Bears fans didn't quite like it. It was very loud. It was amusing at times. But one point to say was that I think there was a few boundaries crossed at times in terms of the fact that the game was still ongoing sometimes when the music was playing, and when when there was the roar and the Cougar roar or whatever it is they were doing. And there was a couple of moments actually when, as I say, when the ball was kicked through and the Bears players were trying to gather, and there was noise. So, as well as the conditions and everything else that the Bears players had to cope with, there was this extra noise and stuff happening. As I said, I'll be quite nice about it, but a number of the Bears supporters really didn't appreciate it at all.
So you're not suggesting that our Tim should adopt that style when the Bears are back at the Butts Park Arena next week, then? No. I think, the Bears roar is done. Always raises a bit of a chuckle amongst visiting fans, but I think that's about as far as we should go. Tim can stick to playing his amazing set lists before and after the game. I have to say, the Cougar, I'm not going to call it a roar, it was more of a growl. The way it came across on the commentary I was listening to, and this might offend any Keighley fans who are listening, but it sounded a bit rubbish. Am I being harsh in saying that? It didn't...
I think it wasn't a recording. I think it was Mick himself doing the...
Oh, right. Wow. Okay.
I thought you were going to...
I thought you were going to say they had a real cougar at the back of the park. I was getting worried.
Strangling a real cougar about the last bit. But no, it was... I think it was Mick himself that was doing it. But
okay, well, points for effort then.
Someone compared it to sort of a bit Phoenix Night-ish. But I don't want to make it sound bad, because actually one thing, Mick spoke before the game and then I saw him speaking after the game. And one thing the guy clearly has is a lot of passion for the Cougars. Mm-hmm. So, and you'll not get many owners going on the mic and trying to G up the crowd.
I can't imagine Alan getting the mic and trying to do a Bears roar down it. Well, maybe he should. Well, I mean, I guess you can't win them all, and I think we just have to say well done to Keighley. They were clearly the better team. They were the smarter side, and they deserved the win, didn't they, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of those, it was disappointing on the day. On reflection, not so much a bad performance, just lack of experience and game management on the day. Mm-hmm. Plus Keighley with their tails up against a big home, their first game under the new management, a bumper crowd at home, and everything sort of conspired against the Bears with the weather and everything else. So
yeah,
just someone to put down to experience. The players just need to dust themselves down and get back on with it.
Yes, and they can do that very quickly because it's quite a quick turnaround for the next game. So we'll move on to previewing the next game, which is in round 3 of the Coral Challenge Cup, and it's happening this Friday. Bears travelling up to Doncaster. I mean, Craig, it's a quick turnaround from Sunday, which could be a good thing, get that game out of their system. But it's also, going up to Doncaster is never an easy task. And Tom hinted in your chat with him afterwards, we might see a few new players coming into the team. It's difficult to know what to expect from this one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, the Bears went up there last year, got well beaten at the Keep Moat. They are a tough team to play against. They're a big physical side. Depending on who they have. Yeah, so Doncaster will be a big physical side. They will, depending on who they have, I think you can still have dual reg in the Challenge Cup. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that players might get cup tied if they play dual reg for another team. So they might not have the likes of Hakim Maludi, who punished the Bears so massively last year when he played. And he's clearly a quality player. He performs well in the Super League, never mind playing against League One side.
It's just cheating putting him in. It's just ridiculous.
But the Bears, I think they'll find a different surface at the Keep Moat. It's a really, really good surface there. Nice stadium, really nice stadium. And, they'll have a chance of playing some more open running rugby.
Mm-hmm. So here's a controversial question for you. Do you think the Cup is a distraction for the Bears? Do you think they should just focus on League One this year?
No, I think because of the league having being smaller this year. I think it would be nice to have a cup run. I mean, I think last year with the Bears having the 2 wins in the 3 games in the Challenge Cup, getting to the 5th round. With all the league games in it was a much bigger league then. That was quite a long, hard season, and I think the Challenge Cup run last year certainly had an impact in terms of the Bears' league performances. There was times when the squad was very thin due to injuries, players off representing their country and university sides and so on. So I think go for it this year. I mean, Doncaster away is about as hard a draw as you can get. This season they've beat Newcastle like the Bears have. Mm-hmm. They lost narrowly to Hunslet, who've managed to go top of the league, and then they beat Workington, one of the favourites to win the league. So I don't think there'll be a huge amount between the two sides. Obviously, Doncaster playing at home will fancy it. Mm-hmm. But the Bears, as I say, the Bears can put the disappointment of Sunday behind them. They've got every chance.
I mean, my heart is obviously saying that the Bears will scrape a win. I can't help but feel like my head is telling me that the Bears Cup run is not going to be a particularly long one this year, but I'm very much hoping my head is proved wrong. I mean, have you got a prediction in mind for Friday? I
think the Bears just need to go there, as I say, put Sunday behind them, throw caution to the wind, and just play their game and go for it. Mm-hmm. And every chance of getting a result. I think the other thing to say as well is that you talked about concentrating on the league. I have a feeling Doncaster, won't necessarily want a cup run. Mm-hmm. For them, they're what they'll be looking for now is to finish at the top of the league and get promotion. I think for that, they're one of at least 3 or 4 clubs who've got really strong ambitions to get promotion to the championship this year. So the league will, or the cup will maybe be a distraction for them. So the Bears need to seize on that and try and get the result.
Great stuff. Well, fingers crossed for a bit of cup magic, and whatever the result, we will of course be back next week to reflect on it all. But that's where we go for this week. Don't forget, you can find out more about us and links to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, all of those links at covbearspodcast.com. We're at covbearspodcast on Twitter. We're sponsored by York's Tim. Craig, I'm glad you finally dried off and thawed out from your trip to Keighley. And yeah, like I say, fingers crossed for a bit of a cup upset, and I will see you next week.
Cheers, mate.